Hey, everybody. This is FaceTime with the Content Guy. Casey here. I am joined today by Michael Sansolo. Michael, say hello. There you go.
Hey, everybody.
So we decided to do this one together because of something that I wrote yesterday. It was in the story about Amazon and Jeff Bezos stepping down as CEO. And basically what I wrote was the following in my commentary. I said, let's be clear. As Jeff Bezos steps down, there's little question that he will go down in history as one of the most important business people in American history, and certainly one of the most influential retailers ever. He's changed almost everybody's life in one way or another, often for the better, although sometimes not so much. And I wrote that, and Michael and I ended up having a phone conversation to follow up on that, in which you said,
well, this is something that happens on sports talk radio all the time. If you could create a Mount Rushmore of, let's say, center fielders who played in New York, who would be those four key people? So we started discussing, does Bezos belong on the Mount Rushmore of people who have transformed not just retail, but the way Americans, I would say, cook, shop, and eat?
But let's isolate it to retail. But through retail, basically.
Through retail, okay.
Because otherwise you're talking about left fielders and right fielders. So let's, and it just becomes a different discussion. So let's talk just about center fielders here. I say Jeff Bezos, and your first reaction was
Sam Walton.
Right. And I don't think there's any argument that on our retail Mount Rushmore, you got Jeff Bezos and Sam Walton. I think where it gets interesting is if you try to decide who else belongs on the mountain, because I'm not sure who else fits into that category.
Well, and here's where I chimed in, because if we look at both Walton and Bezos, that they created a different way of shopping. I think we have to go back almost to the genesis of the way retail is today. And it would be names that we don't commonly talk about. Michael Cullen, who his company was King Cullen, obviously not very influential today, but they were the first supermarket, unless you're from another part of the country that declares that Piggly Wiggly was the first supermarket, with a guy named Clarence Saunders who created that.
And I'll dispute that, because see, I think the difference is, and listen, Amazon is a relatively young company, but let's work on the assumption at the moment. And listen, something can happen next year that will make this discussion moot. But let's work on the premise that Amazon is going to continue to be ubiquitous in our lives. Fine, Michael Cullen or Clarence Saunders, right, developed a supermarket, but I mean, I'm sorry, King Cullen is hardly a blip on the competitive landscape. And while Piggly Wiggly has a lot of stores, again, if you're not from a certain part of the country, you've never heard of them. And I don't think you could argue that those companies have had the kind of influence on American life that either Walmart or Amazon have had. Okay, and then you could talk about, let's say, Robert Wegman, or you could talk about George Jenkins or Charles Butt. Again, incredibly influential people. But if you're from Idaho, you've never heard of any of those people, right? They're, again, now Publix and Wegmans are expanding their markets, so that is changing too, but only to a small degray.
And also, Kevin, I would argue what those two companies have done is they've taken a basic format and then they've done great things with it. They run fabulous stores, but Sam Walton actually created a new way of shopping. Jeff Bezos certainly created a new way of shopping. I think one of the items we got into in our discussion is, obviously we're doing this in 2021. There is no way of magically going to 2031 and saying, all right, did Amazon have a lasting impact? I think at this point, we can say Walmart has had something of a lasting impact. They've been around for 50 years. Amazon's still relatively new.
But for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that it will, understanding that we'll may have to eat our words. But again, looking backwards, because we can't look forward at companies that haven't been invented yet, who else has had that kind of impact on the retail front? Maybe Howard Schultz at Starbucks? Maybe? Is that
maybe Roy Kroc, McDonald's? Changed the way America eats.
Yeah. one of the ones that you brought up at one point was Saul Price.
Saul Price.
I'm not, again, influential, but not on the same scale as Sam Walton or Jeff Bezos. And I think it's interesting. I think I'm trying to figure out, and I know we both feel this way. We want the audience to chime in. If we're missing somebody, or for some reason you think our argument, there's a flaw in our argument, and it can't just be because you don't like either Walmart or Amazon, we'd love to hear it, right? Because I think it's really interesting if you're coming up with those kinds of titans. I mean, it's like if you're thinking about if you're thinking about Mount Rushmore itself, okay, Dwight Eisenhower was an incredibly influential president. He gave us the interstate highway system, but you don't put him on Mount Rushmore, right?
No.
Lyndon Johnson was an incredibly influential president. Civil Rights Act, don't put him on Mount Rushmore. So who are the other people that you would put on that thing? And it's really hard to come up with two other people, I think.
And actually, as we talked, and I want to give Kevin credit on this, because he started talking about people who have been transformative in American life. And a lot of us might, historically say, well, Henry Ford created mass production, which actually leads to the consumer society that we have today. If you have Henry Ford, and then there's another Mount Rushmore that has a guy like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford. Does Steve Jobs go on that one? Because he's certainly
and I would think
different lifestyle.
I would think absolutely, but then it's interesting because then you get, this is where you get to have the center fielder like Mickey Mantle versus Willie Mays argument. Okay, so you got Steve Jobs, you got Bill Gates, you got Andy Grove, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, Sergey Brin. Okay, who is the most? I mean, okay, let's take Andy Grove out of there for a second because Intel. Well, I just don't. They're not on the same scale. Although they made a lot of things possible. It's a really interesting argument when you think about the entities and the personalities, which is really important, right? It's the personalities that kind of imprinted themselves on those business entities that made them transformative to, and in the case of both Amazon and Walmart, not just on the American public, but on a global population.
Yeah. And again, one of the interesting things about having this discussion, and obviously, folks, let's remember this is conjecture. Kevin and I don't own a mountain that we're going to start carving things in. But how will Amazon do now that it is going through this transformation? We have seen how Apple has done. You mentioned Howard Schultz's name. Now, you wrote on Morning Newsbeat about Bezos stepping down. Which Howard Schultz will he be? The one who went hands off or the one who couldn't stop meddling? So
I hope he's neither, because the one that was hands off is the one that ran for president and lasted about a week and a half.
But he didn't know how to let his company grow beyond him. It's always interesting that Walmart grew substantially after Sam's passing. And David Glass, who neither one of us suggested for that Mount Rushmore, David Glass oversaw the introduction of the Supercenter and the global expansion of Walmart. But Sam was the visionary who came up with the idea. Yeah. And it's possible that Bezos in a couple of years will say, wow, that company is so much better now that Bezos is in retirement doing whatever he's going to do with all that money.
Well, and as you said, if we, again, to transfer the argument to baseball, we could have our argument about Willie Mays versus Mickey Mantle. And yet there's somebody playing today who may supplant both of them.
Yeah, Mike Trout. And by the way, you keep leaving out Duke Snyder for all the New York baseball fans out there. It's not fair. It's Willie, Mickey, or the Duke.
But that's true. And you're right. And Trout may just, and by the way, there's some kid playing Little League in somewhere, someplace who may supplant him, which is, by the way, almost the best lesson that to take from all this is somewhere there's somebody who's coming up with a retail concept that is going to is put the rest of them to shame. That will be the next Sam Walton or be the next Jeff Bezos. But anyway, listen, we invite everybody's nominations. We're not going to build a mountain. We can put their faces in the snow out there. Maybe it'll melt one of these days. Anyway, that is what is on our minds on this Thursday morning. And as always, we want to hear what's on your mind.